You know, it's kind of funny when I was starting to think about it. You know, people say, well, what got you into all this? I remember, I think I was 12 years old, and my parents used to take me to, my sister and I, to these Italian American resorts up in the Catskills back in the early 60s for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you know. The Jewish had their own, uh, you know, a lot of the Jewish vaudeville guys would go there, and Mike Garzilli's, I remember Pine Hills was sort of like that, you know, and they brought in acts. I think I was 11 or 12, and they had this guy named Omohundro, I'll never forget him, the singing cowboy, and he needed somebody, so he pulled me up, and he told me this bit real quick. It was, you know, I don't remember the specifics, but I actually improvised with this guy for about 10, 15 minutes on stage, and he took me aside and he said, "You got good timing, kid. You ought to work on that," you know. So I didn't really think much about that, you know, but that was my first foray into show business. And you know, I didn't really ever get into it. I remember doing some like in closed circuit TV broadcasting stuff when I was in the Navy on the ship, and they said I had good presence, you know, on camera, but I didn't really take that to heart until, oh, I guess it was, I just got out of the Navy. I guess I was out of graduate school. I was teaching. I was in my 20s, and I remember seeing a friend of mine from high school on the Bionic Man. And I said, boy, that's kind of neat. I never thought, you know, he would do something like that, you know. And I said, I think I could do that. So I ended up taking these workshops at a local dinner theater with this older character actor. At that time, he had 15 to 20 years on me. And I took a couple workshops, and he said, "Oh, you got some skills, kid. You know, would you like to work in a professional dinner theater?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, first you're going to have to go do some community theater. Let me take a look at you," you know. So he did that, and I think I mentioned that in one of my other ones where the first show I ever did, one of the actresses had a panic attack, and I had to improvise opening night, my first actual stage show, and they told me it only goes up from here, you know. So I ended up doing dinner theater part time, and then you know, I switched out from teaching full time to acting full time, and then teaching part time. But uh, I think, you know, when I came back to New York. Well, let me backtrack a little bit. I worked at this dinner theater for about 10 years. Mystery dinner, Sloot's Mystery Dinner shows. I'll give them a plug, you know. But I learned a lot about improvisation off the spine of a show, and I really, I worked with a lot of talented people down there in Florida that were able to do that, and that kind of helped, gave me confidence, you know, and did some movies down in Florida. But actually, my big break is when I came back to New York 12 years ago, and in a film called The Family, and Luc Besson picked me over 200 people to give her this major supporting role, and I was ready for it at that time, you know. But that was my big break for that, and you know, and then TV shows and things of that sort. But I remember, you know, when I think back from that first dinner theater experience in Florida, I had a mentor there named Lowell Fenner, who taught me my first workshops, and he kept telling me, you know, he said, if you're gonna do this, John, you either got to go to New York or L.A. He said, you know, Florida's good, but if you're gonna make this a career, you're gonna have to, like, you know, go to the place where there's a lot more talented people and skilled people, and learn from them, and hopefully get some breaks, because this business is about breaks. It's about breaks and being ready when there's a break. You know, you got to have the two together. And but he always kept telling me that it's storytelling. It's always about storytelling, and don't lose sight of the fact that you know, no matter how big your ego gets at times, you know, depending on how well you're being treated, particularly if it's a big budget movie and they treat you like royalty, you know. It's always about storytelling. So what's the story you're telling, and what's your character's role in that? You know, never forget that. And I try to always remember that. You know, I mean, even whether it's a you know, equity showcase show, or if it's a major regional show or off Broadway show, or You know, I haven't been in a Broadway show yet, but you know, time's still there. And or if it's a major production movie, or even a ultra low budget or a student film, it's still telling this story. So always prepare as if it's the story, and it's not about the, you know, and the money is important, but it's about the story. My mentor I have now, Joe, who's down in Florida, he's a trial lawyer, but he also does one-man shows, and he keeps telling me, you know, it's even if there's only one person in the audience, you know, you're performing as if you're performing for the king. You know, there's always that story you've got to tell, and he's in his 80s and he still does this, you know, and so that's something I've always carried with me over the decades, is that it is about storytelling, and that's, you know, what it's all about. And whether they are buying what you're selling, which is another actor told me, is up to them. You know, I only have control of telling that story this way. And if they're not buying what I'm selling, they're not buying what I'm selling, you know, and then go on to the next one. Although I may be upset that I didn't get that role, I don't have the luxury of maybe waddling in that resentment for more than 2 days. So I've got to keep going, you know. So that's something that I kind of keep with me over the years, you know, and that's helped me, you know, still have faith in the business, you know. I mean, there are times when you go into these slumps, like a baseball player, you know, it's like, you know, on the average, you may get 1 out of 10, sometimes 1 out of 20, you know. I remember last year, you know, I went like 20 auditions before I really booked something solid, you know. But I've done other things, you know. I write, you know. I've had one movie made called Who Wants to Marry My Husband, which was a very interesting experience. I co-wrote that with a French writer-director who, she used to be in soaps, Anne Martineau, I think, in France or in Canada, I'm not sure. But you know, she, back in, I think it was the late 90s, she went to film school, learning to edit and everything, and put the money up, and made this movie. Her husband did lighting, and it does well. It's distributed, you know. It's a comedy, and so it's actually a film I wrote that actually got made, you know. And I'm in the process of trying to get some other movies made. I have one script I co-wrote called Say Nothing that I wrote with Lady Sarah, and that's won 11 awards, screenplay awards. So we're hoping to get that. We've also made it into a play, and trying to get that produced in New York. And I've written a horror film that's gotten 3 awards called Sparks, and I've written a sci-fi musical comedy for the stage and won 4 awards in New York. So that gives me motivation to keep going in that. I've written a murder mystery, produced, and I also do a solo show in Jimmy Durante that's approved by the estate. But I also like doing exploratory plays that tell different stories that would not normally, you know, maybe get the major funding, you know, but that tells a story, you know. I did one called Circus Dreams that may get made into a play. That was a reading where I played this Greek father of a son who gets beat up because he's gay, but he's sort of like an Archie Bunker crossed with Zorba the Greek, which is a fun role, you know. And you know, I played an Israeli, you know, I mean not Israeli, but an old Jewish guy in Mein Kampf, the George Tabori play, and you know, to tackle that side of the issue. And I played a Palestinian on the mulberry tree in a stage reading that looks at the pre-1947 demarcation line between Israel and the Palestinians when they were living together in villages. And then when the line came, the Palestinians had to move out of the house and their friends took over the homes. So that was I mean, I like plays that kind of tap, you know, these things. I played an Afghani bodega owner, had to learn Dari and Arabic on dealing with the Taliban and raising a daughter as a boy, Bacha Posh tradition among Afghani tribal. But it's all about telling these interesting stories, you know, and they may not pay a lot initially, but I've had a chance to tap that aspect, bring something that I have in me to tap that. So if a major role comes that has that flavor, I've visited that ride before, you know, so the learning curve would be a little faster, you know. I do that, you know, with songs now. You know, I used to really, because I sing, but I don't sing that often for auditions. So when I do, I used to get really overly prepared for it. But now, I know what the protocol is, you know, and songs are no different than sides for acting. It's telling that story of the song. So approaching it like telling a story is more important, you know, and then, you know, learn the melody and then get a piano player, you know, accompanist to play the accompaniment and, you know, make sure you know, you're on pitch and you're in the range of the interpretation, you know. It's all about telling stories, you know, and, you know, it's kind of neat, you know, you get to tell stories, you know, and always do something also that furthers one's career or validates yourself as a full-time actor, which means, you know, looking up auditions every day, going back and editing a screenplay, you know, submitting it, you know. The action of acting is also the constant preparation of doing things. I want to tell this story. Oh, that looks interesting. I wouldn't mind, you know, reading for that kind of thing. You know, that looks interesting, you know. And then trying to, you know, also staying healthy as best as you can. I swim 3 times a week and I work out the other 2 or 3 days, you know, here in this study. You know, this is my little gym, you know, except for the pool, but indoor pool, which is great in New York City because I got so many of them through Parks and Recreation. But you gotta, you know, do that. And also, that's for the body, you know, to keep limber, but there's also constantly forcing oneself to memorize large bodies of text, particularly as I get older, you know, keep that muscle going. I got sides for this audition coming up for a movie up in New England for an audition, and there's like 3 chunks of sides, you know. I mean, I'll try to memorize most of it, but they want the script in hand. But I got to know the story. I got to understand it. I got to know where this character's coming from, so that when you are on camera or you're doing the scene, it's as if someone was channel surfing and just came in the middle of a scene, and you caught their attention. You know, so it's not like you're acting. It's just that they're voyeuring in on you, telling a story. You know, so I think if that's the main thread, I would probably say, you know, that's throughout my life. You know, I mean, I had a parallel career as a teacher. I mean, I was in the Navy for a couple of years, you know, and as an officer, electronics officer, which was kind of funny. Because they were going to use my bachelor's in psychology at the time to make me a counselor, and just at the last minute they said, no, we need you as electronics officer on the ship. I said, I don't know anything about electronics, and they said, well, we'll send you to electronics school for 6 weeks. So they did that, and I was young, I was married at the time, I'm divorced now, but, you know, and then I went back to graduate school in the GI Bill, and had a pre-doctoral fellowship in psych, and so I went into IO psych, industrial organizational, and experimental, and then I went and got a postdoc in clinical psych in the 90s, and still wasn't really habit. There was still, I still had fire in the belly to still want to act, you know, so I kind of like dovetailed out of that, you know, and in a way, in acting, it's similar in that when we tell a story, like when we do a play, you're inviting people to be affected by this story. In many different ways. There's no one way you're directing them. You know, they may cry, they may laugh, they may walk away unaffected, but you're having an effect on them. You know, and that's kind of the interesting part. You know, sometimes it's just entertainment. You know, if it's a comedy, you want to like feel good. If it's a drama, you want them to feel the emotions you feel at that time. You know, can they identify? Can they empathize? Are they going to think about what they saw? Are they going to change their behavior? You don't know, but you want to have some effect on them. I still use the same techniques for memorization as I did over 30 years ago. You know, and I have to do it more now. When I get a script, I read it to understand it. Go over my lines, and if I have big chunks of monologue, I memorize those first before everything else, because that's the hardest. So you might as well tackle the hardest first. That's the way I do it. And you break it up in little mini texts, little mini themes, and sometimes write it to the side, make an acronym out of it so you know where you're going. So you get that, and then the scenes where it's back and forth, I interpret everybody else's lines, I read their lines, I tape it, and then I say my lines silently. So now I've got tapes of every scene, so I can get off book and I can act the scene out in the room, push the tape, and just respond orally, because it's all about the ear, not the visual. And then, stop and go if I screw up, and build it up until I remember it, But I learned that over 30 years ago watching PBS, watching a old Scottish actor. At least he was old to me at the time, probably my age now. But he didn't get into acting until he was 30-something, which was about what I did. I didn't get into it until I was about 31, 32. And he used to be an engineer, so he was always used to procedures. And he said, they asked him, he said he was a very good Scottish Shakespearean actor. They said, well, how do you memorize all that text? He says, well, this is what I do. And he would use the tape recorder thing. And I said, that's a good idea. So I do that, Other people have different ways of doing it. But it helps me understand the story, because it's repetition. I'm trying to do do it over and over until I really understand the style, which is how do they want this portrayed realistically, a little punctuated, and then I discover whether my anger should rise or flow here, or does my emotion of empathy rise, but you get that through repetition of telling the story over and over. That's why rehearsal is so important, because you discover something each time you repeat it. The challenge in film and television when you're telling stories is that you have to do that on your own. You don't have the luxury of having 6 weeks rehearsals for the movie. You've got to have all that down before you go. And you may run lines once or twice with your partner, but they've already cast you for your character. So, whereas in theater you get more of a discovery process allowed in that, So each one has its benefits, theater and stage and TV and film have the money aspect associated with it in terms of making a lot more money. But in terms of the challenge of telling a story continuously on stage for 90 to 120 minutes, it's theater. And there's no way you can change that, no matter how robotic you get or CGI or virtual reality. It's if you can do that, and you can do this. But it doesn't necessarily mean if you can do this, you can do that. But so I find that theater stage is the bedrock, I think, for acting skill sets, at least my opinion. People would argue with that, but I think that that's where the discipline of storytelling comes in, because you got to be continuous for an uninterrupted period of time. The challenge in TV and film is you have to be very flexible very quickly based on directorial suggestions at that moment. When you're going to do a take 2 or 3 times, the director may want you to change up how you deliver that line or sets of lines, because they get an artistic insight about something and how they want to pursue this, and you try to meet that as best as you can, But it's all about storytelling, I look back on it and I go, well, would I suggest anybody get into this? I say only if you can't get away from it. only if you can't get away from it. But if you can get away from it, do something else. You know, but if you can't get away from it, I mean, no matter what you're doing, you're constantly wanting to emote or dramatize a situation in a way that to punctuate a story, to get it across, and you have that fire in the belly, then this is your affliction, you know, and you want to take that affliction and make it a career, then you've got to figure out a way to make it happen. And you've got to be around people that are healthy enough to guide you to do that without killing yourself in the process, in terms of putting yourself in situations where, you know, the desire to emote or dramatize is so strong that you forget the basics of life's necessities, like rent, you know, eating, you know, taking care of yourself. Because I've seen too many talented actors, far talented, more talented than me, just burn out because they didn't get the balance right. You know, you got to find that balance for yourself, and that's an ongoing process. Taking time for yourself and standing back. And I took a break for 5 years. I remember 4 years, but it was still there. So I had to figure out a way to make it. I've been lucky. But I constantly kind of keep my skills up. But I've been lucky. So, and this business is luck. There's a lot of luck in this business, but you got to be ready when the opportunity presents itself, and to put yourself in situations where the opportunity can happen. In New York, it's, you know, doing stage readings, putting yourself in. I mean, if you're starting out, you know, student films, you know, going to agent, casting director seminars, putting yourself out there, eventually getting into unions if you're not a union actor yet, because you know, the credentials are important for that, particularly in New York and LA. You'll have third-party protection, and the minimum rates are higher. You'll get residuals, you know, so that's important, you know, and pension, health. So they help take care of that, you know, for a percentage of your dues, part of your dues every year, you know. So that's the business end of it. That's something you'll learn. You can take courses on it, workshops, but, you know, or if you're in college, you're getting a BFA or an MFA, you know, make sure you take some business of acting courses, you know, or talk to experienced, seasoned people during the summer or when you have your breaks, you know. But don't forget that it's all about storytelling, you know, and have a good time with it, you know. It's an interesting career. You know, I've traveled many different places on somebody else's dime because of this, you know. France, Paris, Korea, South Africa, you know, down to Florida, up, you know, Pennsylvania. Yeah, you know, and even when I was doing the Down Dinner Theater, I was, you know, went to the Bellagio, performed at Bellagio in Vegas, you know, Phoenix and Memphis, and USO tour in Europe for a month. So there are benefits, you know, you get the travel benefits at times, and when they happen, and enjoy it. Or if you get to go on tour, you know, particularly if you're younger, enjoy it. But don't forget you're telling a story. That's what you're there for. Tell that story.